Any given month in this province, there are thousands of children and youth in the foster care system. That's a lot of young people in hard circumstances trying to make their way in the world. A group of educators and former foster kids want to help, particularly as those young people head out on their own at age 18. With us now to explain, Dr. Rebecca Jocks, forensic pathologist at London Health Sciences Centre and the Indigenous advisor for the Child Welfare Political Action Committee. Jane Kovarakova, founder of the Child Welfare Political Action Committee Canada and a doctoral candidate in political science at Western University. Kim Snow, associate professor at Ryerson University's School of Child and Youth Care in the Faculty of Community Services. And Dr. Renee Ferguson, liberal arts faculty member at Georgian College, which is bringing in free tuition for former Crown wards. She's also an adoptive mother of former foster children. And we are delighted to have all of you here at TVO tonight for this conversation, which we'll start by putting this graphic up, Sheldon, if you would, which gives you a sense of the situation here in the province of Ontario. There are about 17,000 children and youth in the care of children's aid societies in Ontario. Youth aged 16 to 18 are the highest represented age group in care. And I guess we should start just by asking what life is like for those kids, particularly in the age 16 to 18 group. Renee, you want to start us off?
Sure. So I myself did not grow up in care, but I certainly have worked with a number of youth who have. And it is very, very hard for youth facing the aging out and emancipation process. The supports available to them are really focused on simply, getting them out of the system and into, adult life. But there isn't a lot of messaging about post-secondary education and their opportunities and potentials.
You want to follow up on that? Because you're a bit of a poster child for this, aren't you?
Yeah, I guess. So, I left care at 16. I left earlier than I should have even. Most kids are evicted at 18 from foster care. And the way it usually goes, and including for me, is that you fear your 18th birthday, or in my case, you just fear being on your own. But for me, it was just unsustainable to remain with foster parents anymore. So I felt it would be better to be independent. Once you get independent, you receive this small allowance until you're 21. The allowance was $663 when I was in care.
That's per month?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so you have to be very creative at that point to survive on that. And then you're busy trying to fight everyday challenges while you're in care. So you're not necessarily thinking about post-secondary. So I dropped out of high school, just like 60% of youth who leave care.
We're going to come back to your story because you dropped out of high school and you're a doctoral candidate now.
That's right.
So somewhere along the way, you've done good. So we're going to come back to you. Rebecca, what would you add to what we've heard so far?
I agree with Jane's position. I was in foster care when I was really little, so I don't represent the statistic that you showed because I was later adopted out. But I can attest that there are definitely barriers, financial and social barriers that impair success for foster care kids.
And what happens when you do age out?
I think I would leave that for Jane because she's directly experienced that.
Okay, let me come back to that then. Kim, anything you'd add so far?
Well, I think my colleagues are being really kind because I think young people are thrown off a cliff into disaster. And in 14 years, I've worked with a project called the Voyager Project. What I've seen is homelessness, victimization, incarceration, really dire mental health situations that are a result of things like not being able to get medication, not being able to have proper food, not having sleep. So the normative course of discharge from care is off this cliff to no supports at all.
Can we just take a step back? What's going on in a home where the province feels it needs to move in and remove children from their parents?
Well, you have to look at that. The young people I think we're talking about mostly today are those kids who used to be called Crown wards, who are now called kids in the extended care of a children's aid society. And really what that means is the province, the judge, not just the province, a judge has said, there is no more chances for this family. This child needs to have a chance on their own, independent from their family. And the state is now responsible for their care. So the state becomes the parent. Now imagine a parent who could only have 46% of their kids graduate. Most of them discharged into care. 3 out of 5 people we find in a homeless shelter have child welfare experience. This is not a very good picture of parenting.
And Renee, follow up in this angle insofar as how much, if the province is your parent and they're trying to place you obviously somewhere, how much screening or how much due diligence goes into the homes where these children end up?
So I am an adoptive parent. I went through training, I went through screening. But you're always, warned about screening. You're always given advance notice. People are on their best behavior, obviously, when they're looking to become foster parents or to adopt. I think there are many people who are in it for the right reasons, but there are also various incidents that I've seen of overcrowding of foster homes. My own children, for example, were in a foster home with a single parent who ran a home daycare, had 3 other foster children, and then an adopted daughter with FASD. So
FASD being?
Fetal alcohol disorder. And so, these are not ideal circumstances, and children need more attention than they can get in a home crowded with other kids who have higher needs, possibly because of childhood trauma and having been removed from their families.
Let's put another statistic up if we can right now. Sheldon, if you would, the next graphic. 7.7% of all Canadian children under 14 are Indigenous. 52.2% of Canadian children under 14 in foster care are Indigenous. Those statistics are startling. Let's go to this. Kim, why are Indigenous kids so overrepresented in care?
Well, we see that systemically in all our tertiary systems, whether you're looking at homeless shelters, we're looking at prisons. We just had a report come out of that. And you can't help but look at the legacy of residential schools, the ongoing colonization, and the fact that child welfare has been a mechanism of genocide from the get-go. And when we're seeing more kids in child welfare care than at the height of the residential school system, we know that we're carrying on the practices of the past. We need to empower communities to embrace their own children and self-govern their own children's services. When that happens, we're going to stop this overrepresentation of Indigenous kids in care.
Rebecca, I see you wearing something. You're going to tell us what that is?
That's the Métis sash.
Indeed it is. And tell us a bit about your background.
So I'm a citizen of Métis Nation of Ontario, and when I was in foster care, my foster homes were filled with First Nations children. And
Where were you in foster care?
in Northern Ontario.
Okay. And how many kids would you typically have been with?
It was a typical foster farm, so what we mean by that is more than 4 children.
Okay. No, I've never heard that expression before. A foster farm.
Foster farm.
More than 4 kids.
More than 4 children, and
And you were how old at the time?
well, I was in and out of foster care because I would go back to my bio mom or biological mom. So that ranged from being I eventually was adopted at around between the age of 3 or 4. My adoptive parents, who were my foster parents, don't really recall the time. I think because the transition between being a foster parent and then being adoptive parent might have not been as abrupt as, say, someone drops a kid off of your house that you just adopted. And so my experience in that situation was just a feeling of othering. And so I felt that I was much different than the children of my adoptive parents.
So your foster parents were not Métis. They were not Indigenous.
My adoptive father's Métis.
Your adoptive father is. Okay. As you look back on it all these years later, reasonably good experience, reasonably bad experience, what?
It was not a favorable experience. The feeling of othering is really isolating. It adds to the loneliness of my childhood.
Just follow up on that. The feeling of othering meaning what?
That you're different, that you're not necessarily part of this family because you're not a biological child, for example. So you feel different. It's either very implicit or explicit, the way that you're treated compared to the other biological children of the adoptive parents.
Got it.
And you carry that with you, kind of like an invisible backpack. You carry that weight of loneliness. And then over time, as you develop your own voice and you create your own community, you can feel less lonely.
I was going to ask, do you still feel it?
Yes.
You do? But you're a highly successful person these days.
That's right. I feel really happy and content with a dream that I had when I was a teenager. But it takes a long time to process this because I didn't have any support. I didn't have the skills to show me how to get rid of the stigma of being a foster care kid, how to get rid of that feeling of othering. So for me, it took a long time to process that, and I still am going through that.
Okay, thanks for talking about it. You ready?
Sure.
I want to talk to you about your background.
Yeah,
You ended up in care.
I did.
How did that happen?
Yep. So my family were escaping the horrors of communism, so they came to Canada for a better life.
They were from Czechoslovakia?
Czechoslovakia at the time, Czech Republic now,
Today,
of course, right? And I was born here, but I was raised within their home, so I spoke only Czech at home. I didn't have any exposure to Canadian culture at all.
You lived in Southern Ontario, but you weren't speaking English.
That's right. That's right.
You were how old when you learned English?
Probably about 6 or 7. And that's around the time that we got pulled into care, and they needed me to be able to speak in English to say what was going on at home. So I got an English teacher and a speech therapist, and I got pulled into a foster home outside of my community. So I was sent to another city for foster care. And then, of course, my foster home wasn't my culture, and it wasn't my language. So I understand a little bit about that, the newcomer kind of experience, even though I was born here.
Did you get that feeling of othering that we just heard described?
Yes. And I think that's really quite common. So you're always sort of participating in other people's family lives. So you're watching them sort of have their family life, and you don't really know where you fit in that. And then, of course, there's a lot of policies that disadvantage foster children sort of attaching to that home, because there's always this push to return them to their original family. And if you're bouncing sort of back and forth, you really never know where you fit, right? And then the other policies are things like, respite for foster parents is highly encouraged, and that could be taken many ways, and I agree that that's an important part of the process. But in particular, that translates sometimes to, we're going to go on holiday, and oftentimes the original children are included, and then the foster children go to other foster homes, as an example, right?
How is it then that you say you dropped out of high school?
I did.
How is it that you, a high school dropout, have ended up embracing the post-secondary world to the point where you're now a doctoral candidate?
Yeah. So I guess throughout my journey, how do I even put that? So anyways, I was leaving care at 16. It was too much to handle to be also going to high school. So I promptly dropped out, got my first job at Staples. My first manager ended up coming out to me that he grew up in care. And that was the very first adult I ever knew who had a successful career. So for me, Staples became an automatic backup plan.
What city was this in?
It was in Aurelia.
Okay.
Yeah. And I thought that I might have a career in retail, right? Because that was just the only modeling I ever had for outside of the pathways that are common to foster children, right?
Nobody at any stage in your young life, I gather, suggested to you that, of course, at some point you're going to go to post-secondary and get a good education and a good job and so on.
Well, I don't know. I was a little bit lucky because my bio family, right? They came here because they were getting shut out of post-secondary opportunity under communism. So that means that value system sort of did permeate for me, whereas for others it doesn't necessarily, right?
You did a study on this, and Sheldon, why don't we bring this graphic up here from the middle of page 3, because this really tells, oh my goodness, what a story this tells. Let's look at 1,000 kids who age out.
Yeah.
Is this province of Ontario only? Or
Yes,
what is
this is an estimate for Ontario. Keep in mind that no one tracks statistics on foster children, basically anywhere, including the government.
So let's take 1,000 kids who age out. 400 are going to graduate high school. 400, that's already, a percentage much below the general population.
That's right.
Only 80 of that 1,000 are going to enter university, and only 8 of that 1,000 are going to graduate from university.
Right.
We all know that the ticket to a more prosperous, better life, et cetera, is a post-secondary education. And we've got 8 of 1,000 graduating.
That's right.
What does that mean?
Yeah, so those last two numbers are extrapolated from American studies because there is no Canadian studies, right?
We have some new data.
Oh, good, yeah.
So we're looking, actually, this is optimistic because the data coming on the Children's Aid Foundation shows that 2% of kids in care go on to any form of post-secondary education.
So it's even worse than what we just saw.
It's worse than what we saw.
And what percentage graduate?
Well, 2%.
Like this was less than 1% graduating, right?
Yeah, no, they're looking at 2% completion, right? Slightly higher graduation, but we have a completion rate in Ontario at about 6.8% roughly, including apprenticeships, colleges, and university. right?
Okay, so I got to find out, how did you end up in university then?
Yeah, so I knew that I wanted a better life for myself, and that's not always messaging that you get, because frequently, like I've had foster parents look me in the eye and be like, Jane, I promise you're going to fail, right? So you get a lot of negative messaging, and there's a stigma of being a foster child.
Meaning they would try to dissuade you from going?
Sometimes that happens. Yeah, sometimes, not in my case, but I've definitely heard that, actually. So, but in any event, so I end up dropping out of high school, working at Staples. I saved my first 6 months of my salary because I believed I deserved better things in life. And I bought a 5-star inclusive to the Dominican, and I hired a limo to take me to the airport from Aurelia. So like, but I feel like
This is not the classic story, but
if
anyway.
I was
go on.
going to share that with my work, I would have been very much discouraged from doing it. But what it taught me was that you can work hard and you can have opportunity, and you deserve good things in life too, right? So eventually, I had a partner, and he was studying to go to college, right, electrical engineering, and I might have convinced him to allow me to do one of his assignments. And then I got a 90, and I was like, what? All this time I thought I was stupid. I tried 5 or 6 different high schools. It wasn't working out. I know I'm the common denominator, right? And then I'm trying a college assignment, and I'm like, maybe I can go. So then I applied as a mature student to community college. It was Georgian College, actually.
Where you work.
Yeah, because I was in my community. And I was lucky to be accepted to a general arts and science program. And then I was a college transfer to university in Laurentian. I know you're the chancellor at Laurentian as well. Laurentian was in my community at the time, right? They had a Barrie campus.
They had a Barrie campus, yeah.
That's right. So I did finish Laurentian, and the amount of major critical thinking changes that occur in university created such a confidence that after that I was able to go on to London School of Economics.
You got your master's at the LSE.
Yeah.
That's crazy considering where you came from.
I know. And that I funded myself, right? I left into my bio-grandpa paying my undergrad, and that was a big boost ahead for me, and that doesn't happen for a lot of people, which is why we're negotiating tuition waivers at universities and colleges province-wide right now.
Well, since you put that, again, Sheldon, help me out here, bottom of page 4, let's put the list up here, because yes, you're part of a group, some of whom are represented at this table here, who are trying to get so-called Crown Wards tuition waivers, as in, if you're Crown Ward, go to university for free. And as of this September, Laurentian University in Sudbury, Georgian College in Barrie, and then the affiliate universities at Western, which are Huron University College, King's College, and Brescia College, are all going to be doing this, right? Offering tuition for free.
Yeah.
What difference is that going to make in the lives of the kids who are able to take advantage of that?
Well, first I just want to say I'm so proud of those institutions for taking that step. I know sometimes governments provide tuition waivers for these types of groups on occasion, and that's obviously changed in Ontario, but I don't even think it matters that it changed, because when governments give a tuition waiver, they always have an age restriction. But if you're going to evict us with nothing at 18, and we have very complex lives to begin with, we're probably not going to be able to qualify for that in time because we're not hitting life milestones at the same time. And by the time we get our life together in our 30s or 40s, and now we want to access some social mobility, everything's dried up, so we're dissuaded from doing so.
We have somebody here from Georgian College, and I want to ask you, Renee, universities and colleges are cash-strapped all the time. They are always looking for money, and the notion that they are going to trip over themselves to try to let more people study for free is not usually on. So how'd you get this through?
Well, I think really at Georgian College, we have a leader who values social justice and equity access for underrepresented groups. And Marilyn and the financial department were very good at looking at the numbers and figuring out a way to make it work. So we will accept 15 youth or adults to our program in fall 2020. And what I want to comment on just briefly about the age limiter being gone, this is a huge game changer, because it's opening up opportunity for folks later in life that may not have expected it. And it's changing that messaging. It's changing that communication that they are othered, that they are not expected to go on to post-secondary. What we're saying is, no, you can. And in fact, we expect you to, and we're going to pay for you. So I think it's simply getting creative with your numbers, having a look at what you can do, and then finding the funds to make it work. And I believe that all the institutions in Ontario can do the same.
I just wanted to ask you that as a follow-up. Is there any reason why you believe other institutions in this province ought not to be able to do this as well?
No, I think we can do it.
And I might add to that, if that's okay.
Please.
Right, so I've been doing some of these negotiations with colleges and universities. There's many more we're discussing with right now. And occasionally I'll have feedback such as, hey, Jane, here's what we're already doing to support access for former foster children, because I want to say it shouldn't just be Crown wards even, right? So anyhow, so they give me all these complicated programs. It takes them maybe 20 to 40 minutes to explain to me this partial program that applies to a partial group of students in, partial different streams.
So that'll be real easy to access if you're a Crown ward.
So what I'm saying, and I'm like, that might make sense when you're just thinking of it as one institution, this is what we're going to do. And you fund it then, and then no one takes advantage of it. Because what you're asking a 16-year-old to do, who's been traumatized, doesn't trust systems, probably doesn't have the language to navigate the system, you're asking them to have a PhD in 40 different institutions' partial programs, right, before they apply. So what I'm saying is maybe consider not just thinking of it as one institution. Think of it as a broader messaging that'll be easier for children who live in care to understand when they're trying to make decisions. So the messaging of your tuition's going to be free is simple. And you can take it from those partial programs and those complicated schemes and apply it to free tuition waivers. And that's just simple to understand. But the other piece is if you have funding limitations, start small.
Yeah.
Start with 10 or 15 positions. If all 40 institutions did 10 or 15 positions, there would be more opportunities than there were people to take them.
Exactly.
Kim, I want to get your view on what you think of this.
Absolutely. But and there's no excuse for all the colleges and the universities and the apprenticeship programs to waive at the get-go tuition. But tuition's not enough.
No.
And that's a really
Exactly.
important thing.
Yeah.
And in the Voyager Project, really early on, we actually had opportunities to provide free tuition. So that really wasn't so much the barrier. What the barrier was the othering, the feeling like they don't belong, the real structural barriers to going to school. Most of my undergraduate students have an auntie or a parent who's bringing them food, checking up on them if they're okay. You know, this week I was fielding phone calls from young people about the coronavirus, because they're young people coming out of care and they don't have anyone else to call, right? Whereas I know in my classroom, I'm standing there talking to my students about them. But when you're out without parental support, you're on your own.
I know you were recently here and
Yeah.
talked about the Laurentian project that you're involved with, the Voyager Project, excuse me. For those who missed that show, just fill us in.
So the Voyager Project's been operating for 14 years, and these are all former Crown wards who generally we meet them in grade 7, and we say you should and can go to school. And it is not a Ryerson-specific program. It's you should and can go to school, whatever that looks like for you. If that looks like an apprenticeship program, that's great. We're going to help you get there. If that looks like going into the Army, we're going to help you get there. It doesn't matter. The idea is to have young people themselves tell young people this is a way to secure your future. And frankly, what we've seen over the years is, while we've had much success with this program, we have hundreds of graduates now. They're always one step from homelessness. Because when you're on such a tight stipend in the city of Toronto, all it takes is even something like, I can think of times where one young person, for the first time having grown up in care, was able to have a party for his friends. But it cost a little bit more to have his party. It wasn't even out of control party, nothing, just a party like young people do. But he spent $200 extra. Well, that meant he couldn't pay his rent. And he's on a month-to-month rent. At the end of that month, he's evicted. Now we have a homeless student trying to go to college. That barrier becomes too much. And while many of our young people are homeless and go to school, it's enormously difficult. Their grades suffer, their self-esteem suffers, right? We have a meal once a month, and very often kids, the cost of living right now is so high. Kids will come in hungry. So we have students going to school, we may have gotten their tuition paid, we might even have gotten their rent paid, but they're hungry most days. And 1 month having a dinner with me is not cutting it. I would like to see programs in every college and university like Voyager that have peer supports. I'd like to see things like good food boxes provided to young people so they get good nutrition. I'd like the Children's Aid Societies to follow their kids right through post-secondary education.
You're working on this, right? You got the
Yes.
tuition piece done,
Yes.
but now comes the rest.
Precisely for this reason. Financial support is simply not enough. So we're building a support model. I have an advisory committee at the college that's working on rolling that out. And what we're going to do is ensure that we're educating the college community, first of all, not to assume family privilege in all of the learners in their classrooms for various reasons. When we assume family privilege and we operationalize that in our teaching and service provision, what we are doing is we are leaving people out and we are othering them again all over.
Just
and
explain
this
that to me.
needs to start early.
Assuming family privilege means what?
Right, exactly. So people don't think that the students sitting in their classrooms lack family or don't have family support, we make an assumption as a culture that we all come from that, and we don't. And youth from care are often in that position, right? Unless they've made connections again with their family. But they may have gone through a period where they didn't have that. So lacking family privilege is devastating to a young person, because they're sitting in a classroom with the majority who do have family privilege, and the teacher assuming they have family privilege. So activities are structured around family discussions, structures, even in service provision. We talk about meals and closing residences, for example, in the winter semester for the Christmas break. What if that's your home because you aged out of care and you live in residence? You don't have a backup. So educating the college public about family privilege and about trauma and how that looks in an adult learner, because the effects don't go away. Rebecca so eloquently stated before that the loneliness is pervasive and continues. It doesn't go away. Trauma doesn't go away. We have to cope with it, and we have to work through it on a daily basis. And then we are also going to work on a program, we're calling it a coaching program, because mentoring kind of looks top down, but coaching is support bottom up, like the student is the athlete. They're the one doing it. They're the one going for the goal. The coaches will help give them the cultural capital and the social capital they need to survive and thrive in post-secondary.
Who are the coaches going to be?
So those will be people at the college and people with expertise. We will also have people who have had lived experience in the system. But we are asking for college employees to be volunteers in this program, and I've had great reception so far. And I think if we can have coaches who are people who are supports when they go through those peaks and valleys in their educational journey, it's someone who they can talk to and who can refer them to resources and services. Because an assumption of family privilege is that everyone knows what to expect when they go to college or university. Maybe you had a parent who went. Maybe you had a sibling. What if you didn't have anybody? And what if you didn't have the Voyager program to tell you about what to expect in grade 7 or 8? So we're really working on a holistic model that will help to advance their success once they get in our doors. It's not enough. And then we're hoping to help adults who are already there who are not necessarily on that tuition waiver program. And one final piece, family privilege is not just limited to people who grew up in care.
And the way family privilege actually plays out when others who have it are speaking, they say things like, nothing should be free. Like tuition waivers shouldn't be free for people. You need to make them work for it, or you need to, and they start putting all these extra barriers in. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like those who grew up in care already paid. They didn't get like the parent, I call it like parent welfare. It's like when your parents buy you things all the time. They tell you all this social capital.
Yes.
They give you the rules in
Yes.
society. Like you've had handouts your whole life if you've had an intact family.
Well, and
right?
if your parents have split up, part of most child support agreements include post-secondary support.
Correct.
Yeah.
But when the province is the parents, we don't expect
That's right.
the same thing.
So we've paid, right? Yeah. So this is just leveling the playing field is all it's doing. And we're talking a lot about getting to completion. So once you get there, encouraging completion. But what about access? How do you get there in the first place? And the Voyager program slightly addresses that. But I'm going to argue we could actually build in provincial policies to encourage this. Yeah. So I'll give you a very good example of one that I read from the book This I Know by Terry O'Reilly. It's in there in a chapter about nudges. There's a Texas high school. It had a lot of disadvantaged students going to this high school. Their post-secondary uptake was 11% when it should have been probably about 60% in the general population. They changed one rule. They changed expectations. They said, to get your high school diploma here, you have to demonstrate that you applied to post-secondary. And they didn't make it a barrier, like they helped with funding with the fee, or they helped with testing, et cetera. And in one calendar year, what ended up happening was it went from 11% to 45%.
Just by putting it on the radar.
Yep, and putting it like this is next step. And then it wasn't even about confidence at that point. It's just a rule. So this is what you're going to do, right? Imagine applying that to the former foster care population. So at 18, we qualify for this little check stipend. So that could be the carrot. Why not have a policy that says in order to qualify for this stipend, you must demonstrate you apply to post-secondary, any type of post-secondary. And the fees are already waived for this group, but the problem is it's not being taken advantage of because no one expects it from them, and they don't have any reason to expect it from themselves in a lot of cases. And you might even see then that our post-secondary uptake goes quite high. Because you saw there that 400 are qualified for post-secondary right now. They graduated high school. If only 20% of those or less are going, then you have a huge opportunity to up that. And now all of a sudden the 600 who dropped out of high school aren't a policy write-off anymore, like I was.
I want to ask Rebecca about the people listening or watching this right now who may be thinking, in spite of all of these good works that are happening, they're very skeptical about any of our institutions being able to adequately respond to the need that is out there. Would you try to disabuse them of their skepticism, or are they entitled to that?
I would think most people that think that are probably former foster care kids or kids in foster care. And what I can say to that is I've been there and I've gone through the system. These institutions can radically change your life. Just believe in yourself a little bit and just apply and see what happens.
You got to have somebody sort of in your corner, though, don't you, championing you?
Yes.
It can be yourself,
You can champion yourself.
of course.
If you've never been taught to do that, how do you do that?
I think for me, it was a reaction to being in foster care. And same with what Jane talked about. You wanted something more for yourself because you know what? Maybe you deserve more.
Kim, what's your view?
But the young people in my program are some of the most amazing young people I've ever met. They're most inclusive, they're the most engaged in their community, they have a strong sense of social justice. These are citizens we want. When I think about that we were prepared to write them off to jails in the street, it just breaks my heart because they're out leading. It's not me, this isn't a peer up-down model, it's a side-to-side model. Young people themselves are leading and they say to me, they push me and they say, let's go reach more younger kids. We had an event this weekend that was lovely as former foster care kids were meeting kids in care and showing them the opportunities, and they were so excited. The young kids like lit up when they saw 3D printing or the image gallery or the cement room and all these different things. None of it was all that special. What it was saying, you can be here, and they responded. And as soon as the event was over, my young people in Voyager said, we've got to do it again. Right? Don't let too long go from when we got them here last time because they know the urgency and they're going to push the systems to go forward. We need to turn the mic over much more to PAC and the young people and let them speak about what they need and start responding to it.
PAC is the Child Welfare Political Action Committee.
Yes.
Got it. Which you founded, yes?
Yes.
You founded
Yeah,
that.
I founded it because we didn't have a seat at the table. We didn't have the opportunity to feed into policy decisions before. Like there is some youth advocacy that occurs, but they always, again, evict you at 30. So now all of a sudden you don't have access.
Can I pick up another angle that you talked about just before we came out here, which is, again, a lot of people watching this or listening to this think that the ordinary member of the Ontario legislature is useless. And you've been dealing with them in order to make some gains here, right?
Yes.
How helpful have they been or not?
Yeah, I actually think if you go into politics, I know they have a bad rap, but most of those people want to make change for the better in society. And we have partisan divisions on what we think is the best way, perhaps. But I think that they've been remarkably receptive across party lines. So we have NDP working with us, getting us meetings with university presidents. We have the Conservatives meeting with us, doing the same, and also talking to us about some of these broader policy ideas. Right? So I think I'm actually impressed. Yeah.
It's also good public policy. The cost to society of losing these talented young people is so much greater than any tuition, we could pay to have them in residence, feed them, and be paying their tuition and be way better off on a factor of 10 than if we continue to do what we're doing.
So then why don't we do it?
That's a good question.
We're not ethically parenting, that's for sure.
We're
Well,
not
and let's be
We're not
fair, we
ethically
had gotten
parenting.
there, we've turned the tide back. We had almost, not quite free tuition, but pretty close to free tuition across the board.
It just wasn't accessible to people from care because there was an age limit.
To many, but we were getting, we were closer.
Yeah.
We have lost some ground, right? So because we had most of the colleges and universities agreeing to tuition waivers, then it was wrapped up into the newer OSAP, then that has been pushed back. So we're sort of starting back again.
And this
but
time
we
without
knew
age
this,
limits.
and this time,
Which
yeah,
is great.
This time you say
Without age
limits,
Yeah,
which
which
is
is
key.
huge.
Yeah.
But we also have to get our scholarships to stop those age limits because, you know, I have many, many young people who are 1 or 2 credits short of their college diploma or their university degree because they turn 30 at that point. Well, that's the course of once you've been ejected out of care onto the streets or into jail, right? Then you finally get rehoused. Then you get into post-secondary education. You're looking at 26, 27 in the best case scenario. So very often their money runs out at 30 and they're left with 1 or 2 credits short.
We are giving the last word to Ryerson University for this program. I want to thank all of you for coming in and helping us out with this. Jane Kovarakova, the founder of the Child Welfare Political Action Committee for Canada, and Renee Ferguson at Georgian College. Renee, Say hi to your Uncle John Ibbotson for us, okay?
Will.
Okay, I think I just did, actually. And on the other side of the table, Rebecca Jocks, London Health Sciences Center, and Kim Snow from Ryerson University. It was great to have all of you on TVO tonight.
Thank you.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.